Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. We have a big show for you today, and we are just going to get started because Donald Trump just issued an ultimatum to Russia to settle the conflict in 50 days or face 100% tariffs to both it and its trading partner. Now, Vladimir Putin has answered this forcefully already, as the Russian government, through Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, has said that Moscow won't tolerate ultimatums and that, quote, Moscow wants Washington and NATO to take Russia's position very seriously. All signs point to Russia settling this conflict on the battlefield. And this has huge ramifications for the future of a rapidly changing and evolving geopolitical landscape. What explains the desperation of the Trump administration on Ukraine at this moment, and why is Russia not batting an eye to his threats? To talk about all of this and much more, I want to welcome back to the show Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former chief of staff of Colin Powell and retired Army colonel, and former CIA analyst and host of Countercurrents, Larry Johnson. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Good to be with you, Danny.
All right. Yes. Very good to be with you. Everyone hit that like button as we get started here. That helps boost the stream in YouTube's algorithm. But yes, let us get started with Donald Trump's ultimatum to Russia. So here is what he announced, sitting next to Mark Rutte, the General Secretary of NATO at this time. Here's what Donald Trump issued to Russia.
One of the reasons that you're here today is to hear that we are very unhappy, I am, with Russia. But we'll discuss that maybe a different day. But we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means. But today we're going to talk about something else. And as you know, we've spent $350 billion approximately on this war with Russia and Ukraine, and would like to see it end. It wasn't my war. It was Biden's war. It's not my war. I'm trying to get you out of it. And we want to see it end. And I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to be there. So based on that, we're going to be doing secondary tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. It's very simple.
So despite his Donald Trump's claim that he is about ending the war, even as he is talking about secondary tariffs on Russia's trading partner, here is what he also had to say during this meeting regarding weapons to Ukraine.
Everything. It's Patriots. It's all of them. It's a full complement with the batteries.
And when do you expect them to arrive in Ukraine, sir?
Well, we're going to have some come very soon, within days, actually. It's a couple of the countries that have Patriots are going to swap over and will replace the Patriots with the ones they have. We have one country that has 17 Patriots getting ready to be shipped. They're not going to need them for them.
All right. How about we start with you, Larry Johnson? What is your reaction to what appears to be now, even rhetorically, a shift in Donald Trump's posture on Ukraine?
If you listened to Trump before that meeting, you were expecting a noise the size of a nuclear blast. And when he finished, you realized all you heard was a mouse fart. I mean, it was a joke. Number one, here's his big plan that NATO, who we largely control, is going to buy from us weapon systems that we're not sure we can produce or even supply. That is a great plan, because right off the bat, the way that they're going to come up with the money is either the Europeans are going to have to take it from the frozen Russian accounts, which will then set off an even bigger economic backlash on Europe, or they're going to actually have to come up with the money out of their own pockets, and their credit cards are already maxed out. They don't have any excess cash to free up, but go ahead and do that. And then the weapon systems. So Trump right there said 17 Patriot missile batteries. Okay, so each battery carries fires 16 missiles. That and we'll go into that in just a second. But so just start doing the math, because total U.S. inventory of all Patriot missile batteries right now is between 50 160. So essentially, he's committing to giving or selling a third to Ukraine when Israel's demanding it, Taiwan's demanding it, South Korea's demanding it. So we've got all these other demands out there that, we've got demand that exceeds supply. And then just the operational use of these missile batteries. Let's say that he is sending 17. That means those 17 will carry a minimum of, 160. So a minimum of about 280 missiles, because, 16 missiles per unit. Well, when you've got an inbound Russian drone, a Garand drone, or a ballistic missile, each Patriot missile battery has to fire a minimum of 2, and more often it's been like 4. So if Russia fires 4 missiles and or Garand drones, that means they will use up all the missiles that came with that one launcher. Well, that means you've got to come up with, you make sure that they have more than just 16 available per launcher. Maybe you want to say, let's have enough so a launcher could fire 4 times at that. Well, there's the problem. Lockheed Martin only makes 700 of those maximum per year. The number is closer to 600. Russia, over the last 5 of the last 6 days, has fired each day in excess of 500 missiles and drones into Ukraine. So what Trump is offering is a Band-Aid for an arterial wound. Just, it's a symbolic gesture, means nothing.
Yeah, Colonel Wilkerson, I want your reaction to this. Also, what Western nation is this that's going to give the 17 Patriot missiles and their batteries, as he says? Do you have any idea? But also your reaction too.
Well, let's just look at Trump's situation right now. MAGA is sundering even as he pontificates. And by the way, to sit there with the least sharp knife in Brussels scabbard, Mark Rutte, even less sharp than Jim Stoltenberg, is just pathetic. But Trump has to put his base back together. His base is split. Not only the interview Tucker Carlson did with regard to Epstein and that affair, which is just devastating for MAGA right now, ricocheting all across the country, up and down and all across, but other things that he's not fulfilled his promises on, not least of which is to end the war in Ukraine, are taking his polls and devastating them. He's got to worry now about whether or not he can maintain any kind of contact with the base from now on, other than those morons in it like Lindsey Graham, who are salivating at this prospect of his base falling apart, but at the same time doing it for ulterior reasons, such as continuing the war in Ukraine, going back to war with Iran, and so forth. So Trump's political situation right now is devastatingly bad. And he's got to do something about it. So what does he do? He comes up and he has these press conferences and he delivers these promises that he's never going to fulfill. And that even if he were able to fulfill, there aren't enough, as Larry's pointed out, weapons out there and CIAs and MI6s and Mossads to garner the selling of them and the transfer of them and so forth to make a difference. So what are you talking about, Mr. President, other than nonsense? And why are you saying it? You're saying it because you sense that you're in trouble. And look for more like this. Look for a string of comments like this. Look for more Bondi and Trumps getting together and saying, for example, that, oh, no, there was no list. There's no problem there. We're not going to look into this. There's absolutely nothing to it. Meanwhile, his principal spokesperson for a long time and close friend and confidant, Tucker Carlson, is not only holding interviews on Epstein and the doings, but also just held an interview with the president of Iran. Tucker's devastating Donald Trump, whom he professes in every interview to still love and treasure. But Trump has gone astray, badly astray, and he's in trouble.
Yeah, Larry. Well, I'm wondering, do you have any idea what Western nation this could be that's going to offer these weapons? You know, the EU top foreign diplomat, whatever she's called, Miss Callas, said that actually it's Europe that's going to be paying for all of this. So actually it's not US support. So who is this mystery country that's going to be essentially doing the US's dirty work?
I don't have a clue. In fact, I don't think the country exists, candidly. Europe economically is in deep trouble right now. Germany is experience a recession. They don't want to call it that, but that's what they're experiencing. Same for England. France, I believe, is just it's barely growing. It's stagnant. So they don't have more money coming in. There's just been actually a study published out of the UK that the quality of life, the wealth of the people is declining, not increasing. So at a time when they're suffering significant domestic pressure to try to deal with domestic issues in each of those countries, these obsessed leaders are showing up wanting to take their money and send it to the United States to buy military equipment that candidly doesn't work. The United States doesn't have enough of anything of any quality that would change the picture on the ground. And so I'm just here looking, I got the number for you. Yeah. The total cost, catch this, for each of those missiles, if the United States supplied 17 missile batteries, the 16 PAC-3 missiles would cost basically $2 trillion. Okay? So it's a number that nobody can afford that. And we don't have the production. So this is the one thing that Ukraine needs that might, and I emphasize might, make a difference on the battlefield is trained reserves, but they don't have them. All they have are the guys that have been quickly press gang into service and thrown in as fresh meat on the front. And whereas Russia is in a far different position where its numbers, it's been recruiting upwards of 50,000 people volunteering, not being coerced, not being drug off the street. And they get to go into a training regimen. So they'll spend, 2-3 months in basic training and then advanced individual training. When they get assigned to units and they learn how to work with the integration of forces, of combining drone operations with armored movement, with infantry movement. Ukraine doesn't have that luxury, and they are paying a terrible human price. If you notice, over the last 4 weeks, each week there's been an exchange of bodies between Ukraine and Russia. Dead Russian soldiers being given to Ukraine, dead Ukrainians being given back to Ukraine by the Russian soldiers. The numbers are staggering in terms of Russia's not getting any bodies because, they haven't had any killed that Ukraine has been able to recover territory. Whereas each week it's in, 6,000, a significant number every week. And that just shows where the losses are taking place, because it means Russia's killing them and they continue to advance. And Ukraine's in no position to recover bodies.
Yeah, no, very good point.
Hey, Fred, run those presses over there. Yeah, $100 bills. Yeah, $1,000 bills too. That's where we get the money.
Yeah, yeah. Colonel Wilkerson, I wanted to ask you then, what do you think explains the hubris of the United States under Trump right now around this conflict? I mean, look at just how Trump is talking about Vladimir Putin during this conference, despite all of what Larry just said. Here we go.
I don't want to say he's an enough guy. It's been proven over the years. He's fooled a lot of people. He fooled Bush. He fooled a lot of people. He fooled Clinton, Bush, Obama, Biden. He didn't fool me. But do say is that at a certain point, ultimately talk doesn't talk. It's got to be action. It's got to be result.
Colonel Wilkerson, what explains this hubris? I mean, given all that Larry just outlined.
Well, he didn't fool me. He made a fool of me. That's essentially what he should be saying. And I go back to his political problems to give some background. But let me back up and tell you where I think we are right now, because I think it is very, very serious. And Americans need to begin to get a grasp of this. If you'll pick up a little jewel of a treatise written by John Maynard Keynes called The Economic Consequences of the Peace, and remember, Keynes was the economic guru at the Versailles Conference, closing out World War I, you will read a quintessentially beautiful expose of where we are today. Only it's his digression into how we got into Versailles. In other words, how we got into World War I. Making it short, the way we got in there is Britain and France were so eager to get into a war to stop Germany's meteoric rise to the top, beating both of them combined in almost every element of economic and technocratic success, that we got into the war. Didn't take the Archduke getting assassinated or automatic timetables of mobilization or whatever. Britain and France were utterly intent on war. When they came to the peace conference, they were utterly intent on continuing what they'd started with World War I, which is what Maynard Keynes really goes into in this book. And what that was, of course, was what they were trying to do with the actual war. That was restore their own empires. That's a very important phrase, restore their own empires, because Germany principally was threatening them majorly. So what did they do? They fashioned the peace so that 20 years later, they go back to that enterprise and try it again. Well, it failed catastrophically. Neither restored their empires. In fact, despite Churchill's valiant efforts to the contrary, they destroyed the biggest one of them, the British. Fast forward. Where is that situation relevant today? We are already in, mark my words, we are already in World War III. We're in the opening stages of World War III. And this war is going to be fought, and it will be fought, whether it starts in Southwest Asia, in the Arctic, or continues in Ukraine and spreads or whatever. It will be fought in order to stop the same thing Britain and France were trying to stop years and years ago, the overtaking of the American empire by China and its other friends. That's what we're involved in right now. The difference, the salient difference today and then, is we have nuclear weapons. This is a very, very dangerous World War III. And to have Trump in the chairman's seat, so to speak, is an utter disaster.
Yeah. And likely we still have many years to go in this escalating World War III under Trump, or not. Or not. Larry, do you have anything you want to say to this before I get to Russia's response?
Well, I was just going to say that Trump is the anti-Dale Carnegie. I think Dale Carnegie wrote a book called How to Win Friends and Influence Enemies. Trump is writing the book of how to lose friends and inspire your enemies. Yeah. And what's happened, over the last last 2 weeks, Lula, the president of Brazil, going into the BRICS conference that he hosted, was, I think, a little squishy when it came to BRICS. He was sort of caught in between. He still wanted to be part of the Western world and still actually harbored hopes of, having better relations with the United States. And then Trump, towards the end of that conference, releases on social media that he's now going to levy 50% the tariffs on Brazil, even though Brazil runs a trade surplus. The United States has a trade surplus. That means Brazil's in the deficit. So we're benefiting from that relationship, but Trump still levels tariffs on them because of their internal political situation with respect to Bolsonaro, the former president. Well, what does that produce? Enrages Lula and unites the Brazilian people who before were, there was some of the political division, but now they're basically saying to Trump, what the hell are you doing interfering in our internal affairs? This is the same thing that police run into when they go out to try to intervene in a domestic dispute. And if they get involved with it, both the two disputing parties turn on them and attack the police. So Trump's done that in Brazil. And he's done that in Iran too. Because notice that from the Iranian standpoint, June 13th was a Pearl Harbor Day for them. In the same way that the Japanese attack on December 7th, 1941, flipped a United States electorate that was opposed to intervening in Europe, flipped them completely where they were ready to go. Buddy, arm me up, put me in uniform. Let's go get those Russians. That's what's happened in Iran now. But it's not just confined to Iran. The Shia population throughout that area have started issuing fatwas and are lining up behind Iran in a way they never have before. Way to go, Donald Trump, man. You're doing a heck of a job. You're taking people that previously were not necessarily willing to attack us. I don't want to say attack us, but that held out a prospect that we could work with them, that he's alienating one after another. It's an insane policy.
Yeah, and what's so insane about the Brazil context is that Brazil is one of the few countries where the United States has a trade surplus with. So all of this talk about trade deficits and needing to, ensure the balanced trade between the U.S. and other countries, it falls right out the window, including also the letter that clearly explains that Donald Trump is seeking regime change essentially in Brazil.
Yeah.
Through
Benny, I don't think Trump
regime.
knows the difference. I really don't. I don't think he knows the difference. I don't think he could define habeas corpus, due process, or tariff for you. I do not think he could.
Well, let's get to the Russian response, shall we? Because there's two kinds of responses that Russia put out there to this threat. So as Donald Trump was leveling this ultimatum against Russia, Russia immediately responded. So here are the words of Sergei Lavrov at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, Foreign Minister Summit in Tianjin, China. Here's what he had to say.
Dmitry Peskov said, we would like to see what is behind that statement by President Trump. So now it's 50 days, it used to be 4 hours. We've heard about 100 days also. So we've been through that already. We want to see what the US actually wants. We understand that there's an enormous kind of pressure that comes towards the US from the European Union, from the NATO leadership, that are openly supporting Zelensky's demand to pump Ukraine up with weapons, including offensive weapons, at the expense of more and more harm coming to the taxpayers of the West. Now, there's a saying we have: don't dig a hole to someone else or you'll fall into it.
So that's essentially the response from Sergei Lavrov. Now, we also had Sergei Ryabkov. He had a far more, I would say, biting response to this, where he told TASS that Moscow wants Washington and NATO to take Russia's position very seriously, that position being that Russia does not tolerate any ultimatum. So, gentlemen, how about we start with you, Larry? What's your reaction to Russia's response to this? Because from the very beginning, it appears that Russia knew all along that likely these negotiations, even though they took the opportunity to engage in them, they were likely a bluff that was meant to subdue and subordinate Russia to U.S. demands. And it doesn't seem like Russia is taking that bluff.
Yeah, I'm fortunate. I've had the privilege of meeting in speaking with both Lavrov and Rybkov. And, you know, they're very serious guys. They're not bullshitters. They're not going to sit there and blow diplomatic smoke up your skirts. They're actually pretty direct, and they never hide behind sort of a very obscure use of language. They try to spell it out very clearly and directly, which is what they've done. They're waiting to see what the United States does, what Donald Trump does. They don't put a lot of stock in his words. They basically ignore them. They say, you know, that there goes Trump again. So let's look at what are the concrete things that the United States could do. Well, number one, the United States has not stopped sending weapons to Ukraine. That was according to Dmitry Peskov yesterday. The United States continues to supply Ukraine with intelligence. The United States has not named a new U.S. ambassador to Moscow. The United States has not looked at restoring the properties that the Obama administration took away from the Russian government that were here in the United States. And they've taken no steps whatsoever to open up direct flights between the United States and Moscow. So the Russians have been very clear what they're looking for in terms of diplomatic exchange, normalization of relationships. So they'll continue talking. They're not going to slam the door on the United States. They're not going to throw a tantrum like Trump throws tantrums. But they're going to sit back and wait and say, let's see the concrete steps. Otherwise, it's just, you know, this is meaningless talk, meaningless bluster by Trump. And we've already seen that he makes all these threats and he doesn't follow through. So they're looking for action, not words.
Yeah, Colonel Wilkerson, same question to you.
Well, I go back to maybe it was 2002. I think it was late 2002, maybe early 2003. And Powell had just had a meeting with Sergey. And I went in to be debriefed on the meeting because I hadn't had an opportunity to sit in on it. And we had also had a series of foreign minister and ambassadorial meetings, if you will, with China, with France, with Germany, and with Russia. And in the course of the conversation, Powell turned to me and he said, you know, Sergey has never told me an untruth, not so far as I know. He's an extraordinarily accomplished man. That's my summation of Sergey Lavrov. I don't know that I would have the stalwart patience and deliberation and circumspection that either he or Putin have with regard to dealing with first Joe Biden and then Donald Trump. We are, Danny, unparalleled in our duplicity, unparalleled in our creepiness, unparalleled in our ability and willingness to cheat, steal, and pilfer, and unconscionable in what we do in the world and call diplomacy. Take what's just happened with, as I understand it, and I think I understand it pretty well, what we're doing to the International Criminal Court. This is unconscionable what we're doing. And we had, of all things, the man deliver the ultimate message at the United Nations named Rubinstein to tell everybody in the world that the United States was ending all aspects of international law that are meaningful. And we were ending it on behalf of that little miserable puppet state at the end of the Mediterranean called Israel. And other Russian diplomats and Putin himself have learned is just that. And now they're trying to figure out exactly how to deal with that despicability, that incredibility, that stupidity, that absolute obtuseness on the world scene, because we still have some residual power.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Larry, this question to you is the United States and, of course, the collective West as a whole, are they pushing Russia right now to essentially wipe out Ukraine's army as the only way to settle this conflict? Because as all this talk of ultimatums by Trump is going on, you have Germany seeking 2,000-kilometer range Typhoon system missile launchers from the United States. You also have, but the question really is this just going to push Russia to militarily settle this thing and just eradicate Ukraine's army? Because I see no other option. What's your take?
Well, I think actually Russia's largely ignoring it because I say it's meaningless because yes, the rhetoric, the words are heated, they've increased with intensity, but there's no capability behind it to back it up. It's like a guy, a double amputee sitting in a wheelchair saying he's going to run a marathon without the wheelchair. Good luck with that. But Russia is following, they made it clear from the outset. Their plan was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Their initial plan was to do it through diplomacy, but use the military, the initial start of the special military operation to get forces in place inside Ukraine, but then to bring Ukrainians to the table. And in fact, that succeeded. They had the outlines of an agreement in Turkey by the end of March, or was it the end of April? And that agreement was destroyed by the United States. Ukraine walked away from it at the direct intervention of Boris Johnson and Barack Obama. And Joe Biden. So then, Russia had to move into the next phase. And when they saw that it was not, there was no hope for the diplomacy, then they set about, not in a panic fashion, but they lost a large number of troops in August of 2022 because their contracts were up, and so they had sort of a stopgap measure with the Wagner Group operations. They did an immediate mobilization of about 300,000 reservists, not new people. And then they set about creating incentives to sign up. And, they've been successfully recruiting. So an army that was basically, I think, around 900,000 in strength is now 1.5 million and trained. So they're following their plan. They're not panicked. And now what you're seeing is they're applying pressure all along the line of contact north to south and forcing Ukraine to stretch manpower reserves that it does not have. And at the same time, we used to see, maybe Russia was capturing a village every 2 weeks. And then they got down to where they'd capture one, maybe one a week. Now they're capturing 2 or 3 a day. And they're doing that in Zaporizhia. They're doing that in Donetsk, Luhansk. Actually, not Luhansk. They've already retaken Luhansk. They're starting it in Dnipropetrovsk, which is just to the west of Donetsk. They're doing it in Kharkiv, which is north of Luhansk, and they're doing it in Sumy. So all along that is this wave of pressure that's coming. And Ukraine doesn't have an answer for it. So yeah, this is going to be a military conquest. They recognize they've given the West every chance that they have to settle it diplomatically. And every time the West refuses to listen to Russia's offer, Russia increases the demands. And I don't think they're not going to end this until they control Odessa.
Yeah, Colonel Wilkerson, I definitely want your insights on this part of it too, the military side, because even Donald Trump had to say in this press conference that he gave with Mark Rutte that every time he talks to Vladimir Putin, after he hangs up the phone, missiles start flying and they start hitting another city. Those were his words, to paraphrase. And this is somewhat true because Russia has been engaged in talks and has done everything it can, as Larry said, to engage in talks. But at the same time, they don't bear fruit. Trump is blaming Russia for this, but Russia is obviously taking these talks as less serious than perhaps Trump is, and they're continuing to go. I mean, in this period since the last time we talked, Colonel Wilkerson, Russia, it seems like every other day the Western mainstream media is reporting that they are hitting Ukraine the hardest they have ever hit them since the war began. So what's your reaction to all of this?
Well, I think that's true. And I think what we're seeing is the opening battles, if you will, in World War III are being lost by the empire. This one is being significantly lost. And it's plotting another one under, oddly enough, maybe not oddly, the same kind of parameters in Southwest Asia. where we have had almost Japanese-like surprise attack on the Iranians that the United States not only blessed, but participated in. So we're opening another theater because we're losing in the central theater. And we're going to lose in that theater too. We're going to lose remarkably badly, even though we have started a series of talks, apparently. That's what I'm hearing anyway. And Tucker Carlson's interview with the Iranian president sort of indicated this, obliquely anyway, to once again get them in a position where Israel could strike them again in surprise while they're in the middle of talks. I don't think that will happen, but I wouldn't put it past Israel to do that. So we've lost the first battle of World War III, if you will, significant battle, through proxies principally, but we were bloodied too. And we've been significantly bloodied in Gaza and Lebanon and Syria, and are going to get even more significantly bloodied in Iran, because ultimately the only way we're going to win the battle on the southern flank, as it were, with Iran in Southwest Asia is us entering the war. And I don't mean B-2s obnoxiously flying over and innocently killing people on the ground maybe, but not doing much damage to the nuclear program. I don't mean that. I mean, we're going to have to go to war with Iran, and that'll be the second theater in which we lose, and on goes World War III.
Yeah. It appears these are the stakes because, Larry, the U.S. is talking about sending long range, continuing on the Biden era program of shipping long range weapons, ATACMS, things like this to Ukraine to do exactly what they did under the Biden administration, which did bring the U.S. and Russia very close to conflict. So how do you see this change? Because I think a lot of people believed that the Trump administration's negotiations were genuine. I had suspicions from the beginning, given that the U.S. has a very poor record of diplomacy, rarely, if ever, engages in it. But nonetheless, now we see a complete shift. Essentially, Trump and Biden's policies are indistinguishable at this time.
Well, Trump keeps trying to say this is not my war, this is Biden's war, but he's gaining ownership of it every day. Let's just again this detachment from reality when it comes to what the United States can supply in terms of military weapons and equipment. Right now, the United States only produces 150 ATACMS missiles per year. Okay, I'll repeat that, 150 per year. So that means if Ukraine gets those ATACMS, they can fire one a day for a little over 5.5 months. Oh boy, that's going to make a big difference. And that means we give them all. We give them everything we make. What is being exposed here is the destruction of a myth, because I think up until about 2 years ago, I suspect that many Russian analysts and Chinese analysts assumed the United States was stronger and more capable than it actually is. But now we've had revelation after revelation that the United States, it's sort of like that Wizard of Oz, the little old man behind a curtain pretending to be this big, powerful person. Because we've seen that the United States Navy, with the carrier task force, went into the Red Sea and could not open up that choke point. The Houthis shut down the ability of the U.S. Navy to open up the Red Sea to maritime traffic. Trump declared that the Grand Leader declared, oh yeah, those Houthis, they capitulated. But it was the United States that retreated. Now, apart from the Houthis celebrating their victory, other countries in the region took note. Look, oh, wait a second. You told me that this was an undefeatable capability. Ditto with what happened with respect to Iran. Again, this was supposed to decapitate Iran, eviscerate it, make it incapable of responding. And within 12 hours of being attacked Pearl Harbor style, they were decimating Israel. And Israel found out they could not stop, even with Iron Dome, U.S. Patriot missiles, THAADs, the Theater High Altitude Area Defense System. They couldn't stop it. And then we get Ukraine. And every weapon system that the United States has introduced, which was to be a game changer. I mean, I remember Scott and I had a debate back in July of 2022, where he said that, oh yeah, those M77 howitzers coming in, that's going to be a game changer. And I said, no, it's not. I think time's vindicated me that I got that one right. And it was the same with ATACMS, same with F-16s, same with every other Wunderwaffen, wonder weapon that the United States has introduced. And so the rest of the world started to wake up and go, you know what? The United States is good at throwing a sucker punch. But man, if you get them into a fight where they have to stay in it and go 12 rounds, they can't do it. That's the message that's coming out now.
Let me just add to that, Danny. We had a debate this morning with regard to the announcement that Trump is going to make sure we get, I think it was 39 or something like that, additional ships in the U.S. Navy. we had a big laugh over that. All of us had a big laugh because we know that the Navy, having absolutely destroyed its recruiting standards, still can't recruit. So where are the people going to be to man these new ships?
I definitely agree with you both. I mean, this Ukraine conflict, Larry, you mentioned more than a few rounds. This is we're into year 3 going on year number 4 into this conflict. And it's only looking worse and worse. And some people dismiss these comments from someone like Dmitry Medvedev. He's the deputy head of the National Security Council in Russia, but he's been second in command. He's been first in command in Russia before. This was his response to Donald Trump. Trump issued a theatrical ultimatum to the Kremlin. The world shuddered, expecting consequences. Belligerent Europe was disappointed. Russia didn't care. It wasn't so long ago that those kind of words would not be coming from Russia. And these kind of bold statements and assertions are happening more and more now. We've had Iran make them. We saw what happened with China just on the economic front with the trade war. So this is more and more, I think, of a realization of exactly what you're saying, Larry. Any response to this, or either of you, please?
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with the story of how they came upon a large adult elephant that was tied just with a rope around its leg, tethered it, and it could easily break loose, but it didn't, because it had been trained to believe from the time it was small, because when it was small, they attached a chain. So it grew up believing that anything that was attached to the leg made it impossible for the animal to get away without being unchained and moved at the will of the master. And I would argue that was Russia up until about 3.5 years ago at the start of the special military operation. They had made assumptions about maybe the United States, as I pointed out earlier, was stronger and that Russia was incapable of maybe standing on its own. But all of a sudden, just when that elephant pulls on the rope, yanks it free, breaks loose and says, hey, I'm free. That's what you're seeing taking place now with the unity, the alliance between Russia and China. They both previously had been willing to participate in this international financial system that was controlled and dominated by the United States, with the US dollar as the reserve currency and the US as the financial hegemon. But as a result of the combination of the Western economic sanctions imposed both on Russia and China, they came to realize, wait a second, no matter what we do to try to appease these people, they keep asking for more. And not only do they ask for more, but they end up interfering in our domestic political affairs. And so we've gone from a situation in the last 10 years, where 10 years ago, China and Russia were willing to back the United States and Europe in imposing sanctions on Iran to control Iran's nuclear program. Now, jump ahead 10 years. Iran is now a member of BRICS, and Russia, China, Iran, they're all working together to create an alternative financial system that's outside of the control of Washington, D.C. And it looks like Trump has actually sort of awakened to this, which was one of his reasons for threatening, Brazil with tariffs. But he's too late because, 3 years ago, China bought a majority of its wheat and soybeans from the United States, from U.S. farmers. Now it's buying the majority from Brazil and China in those currencies, not relying on the U.S. dollar. The world's changing.
Well, Danny, I would just add to that another wrinkle to it. I was asked this question this morning by some of my comrades. Why do you think Russia is not intolerant, but is not that forward-leaning in Iran's gaining a nuclear weapon, and is saying things like it would do the enrichment for them and such? I said, basically, Putin is not an idiot. We do not want any more nuclear weapon states in the world. No one wants any more nuclear weapon states in the world. This is a very dangerous development. And so anything that Russia could do, it's just another reflection of how Putin thinks multiple lines. He's not just on one line like Trump is. I'm not even sure Trump is on one line.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's on anything other than maybe some really cheap stuff. But that's a huge concern of Russia, as it is of everyone else who is a true signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We forget that the purpose of that treaty was to get rid of nuclear weapons, period, including the nuclear weapon states that started it. And that's not ever going to happen, probably, but at least it's a goal that the NPT shot for. That is a dangerous development. If I would do it if I were Iran, I would go to a nuclear weapon. I have no question in my mind. At this point, having been duped the way they've been duped and attacked the way they've been attacked, having had their people assassinated when they were literally on leave, having had their families assassinated, I'd go for a nuclear weapon. I'd do Kim Jong-un. I'd do Kim Jong-il. I'd do that. I'd say, I got a nuclear weapons now. Tough shit, Israel. But, there are people in the world who have some sense.
Colonel Wilkerson, I know your time is valuable, so I wanted to just pivot back to you.
Larry's time is valuable too.
Yeah, but we
Larry's
put you in first position.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you how we got here militarily from your perspective, because part of what we're seeing is that the United States and the collective West, right at its feet, they are very committed, it seems, to continuing this conflict in Ukraine. Especially Europe appears to be very, very, very keen on doing exactly what Donald Trump has said, which may or may not have any military significance at all, which is purchase weapons from the U.S. and then send them to Ukraine. But how did we get here militarily? Because the United States, as you have mentioned, is very much interested in a World War III scenario with Iran, with Russia, and of course with China. But the capacity to do so is very, very limited, which then leads to the dangerous question that you always lead to for very good reason. So, Colonel Wilkerson, how did we get here?
I think we discarded every vestige of diplomatic and other skills associated with diplomacy and substituted military power. And it just happened to coincide, as it often does with imperial decline. It happened to coincide with the deterioration of that very military power that we made the most prominent instrument of our national panoply of power. That's a very dangerous combination, but it is a combination you find repeatedly through the last 5,000 years of human history when empires are going out. They go strictly to their military instrument. They experiment with that instrument. They do all manner of things with it. They try to modernize it, if you will, iron for bronze, bronze for iron, this sort of thing. but they fail ultimately. And I think we're going to fail too. And I think it's also part and parcel of the incredibly bad leadership we have had since we elected William Jefferson Clinton. We have not had a president since W.J. Clinton that I would call presidential. We have not had a president that I would call a diplomat. We've not had a president that I would call willing and experienced and talented in the use of other instruments of national power besides the military. And when you get that, you get people who more rapidly and pointedly turn to the military instrument because it's the only thing that they think will work. So we're in dire straits, and we are totally dependent in those dire straits on a military instrument that is not only not as good as we think it is, but is deteriorating further every day based on a population that, as we discussed this morning also, would probably go to Canada and Mexico rather than be enlisted in the ranks of the military. So we're in very, very deep shit.
Before we let Colonel Wilkerson go, Larry, do you have any response to this?
Yeah, no, I agree with him. Again, it's like trying to put the Band-Aid on an arterial bleed.
Yeah.
Doesn't stop the man. You got an arterial bleed, you got to shut down their artery. And we continue in this self-delusion. That's what's so remarkable to watch, just the lies we tell ourselves. We've taken that Fleetwood Mac song to heart. Tell us lies, tell us sweet little lies.
Yeah,
We don't even have anyone who knows how to put a tourniquet on.
Yeah.
Yeah, we began this conversation too with Germany itself, supposedly the biggest, power in Europe, essentially just going exactly this route, this very self-destructive route, requesting these missiles. But any final thoughts, Colonel Wilkerson, as you leave here?
Stand by for Merz and Macron. I don't think they're long-lived.
Yeah.
I think they're short-term. And then one wonders what will happen.
All right. Well, Colonel Wilkerson, I know you got another engagement in a couple minutes, so I'll let you go. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you, Larry.
Yeah, take care, Larry.
All right, man.
All right. It's me and you, Larry. Me and you, the single Larry. You're no longer Larry squared.
Yeah. Well, in that confusion,
Yes.
you always say he's the better looking one.
And with more hair too. Okay, Larry, let's get to this. I wanted to talk to you about this for sure. As all of these threats and ultimatums were coming at Russia, Russia was at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin, China. And here is what Sergei Lavrov had to say to another set of threats, because we have to remember that it's not just Russia that's being threatened by Donald Trump. It is also BRICS as a whole. So here is what he had to say.
Well, since we've heard specific threats from Washington coming against BRICS, saying that BRICS undermines the interests of the United States, well, let me say this. Earlier, President Trump had a different opinion on that. He directly said that actions made by the Biden administration using the dollar as a weapon has undermined the authority and the respect for the dollar as a currency, irreversible damage. And I'm sure he understands how true that assessment was, and how BRICS and the Latin American communities and other organizations have been trying to find ways to settle trade in other currencies to be insured against this actions coming from Washington. This is a process that's happening. Everyone understands that, including Trump, and this process cannot be stopped.
So that's what Sergei Lavrov had to say. But we have Mark Rutte speaking through Donald Trump, as he has been doing for the duration of his tenure as Secretary General of NATO. Here is what he had to say, reiterating these threats to not just Russia, but also to the biggest of the BRICS.
First of all, that the US will now supply massively Ukraine with weapons out of the US, not just air defense, also missiles, also ammunition paid for by the Europeans. And secondly, that President Trump said, basically, if Russia is not serious about peace talks, within 50 days, he will slam secondary sanctions on countries like India, China, and Brazil. So my encouragement to these three countries particularly is, if you live now in Beijing or in Delhi, or you're the president of Brazil, you might want to take a look into this, because this might hit you very hard. So,
Larry, the hubris of NATO to threaten the three biggest BRICS. First of all, Russia with weapons, and of course now tariffs, which is a very strange threat for Russia. China and Brazil and India. This is a familiar pattern here, isn't it? Those make up 4 of the 5 BRICS. Your assessment of this is just, I mean, the hubris is just astounding here.
This kind of attitude reflected by Rutte is what accelerated BRICS' development of creating actual alternative financial systems. China, for example, has set up the cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, CIPS. This will replace SWIFT, I believe, eventually. Now, right now, SWIFT does more transactions, but SWIFT is basically an email message system between banks, whereas CIPS is a digital, crypto-based, blockchain-based system for moving money almost instantly between banks. Then you take into account the fact, I think it's either 3 or 4 of the world's largest banks are Chinese. I think the United States has 1 in the top 5. So, China alone is already an economic powerhouse and moving outside that. When the so-called U.S.-based international monetary order was put in place in the aftermath of World War II, with the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and SWIFT, it took about 3 years to get that up and running. It didn't happen they didn't have a meeting and say, okay, guys, let's go. Here's your credit cards. And no, it took about 3 years for that to get up and running. Well, that's what you're seeing now with BRICS. The major kickoff of BRICS was a year ago in Kazan with Russia hosting. This year, the session that took place in Brazil, frankly, I was doubtful that it was going to be much of a success. I thought that Lula was too much of I call him an Erdogan type creature who will, instead of having any loyalty to countries like Russia and China, would serve his own self-interest at their expense. But fortunately, it turned out otherwise, and the conference was remarkably successful. And at the end, when Trump topped it off by, threatening 50% sanctions on Brazil over internal domestic political affairs, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. And so now I think you're going to see just an acceleration in efforts to create payment systems and to conduct commercial transactions between countries outside of being held hostage to the dollar. Just as in the past, they could threaten or, try to control Russia's oil because any tanker that's insured by insurance companies in Britain would be penalized. All right. Now they're getting their insurance in Russia. That's what the Russia, China, India, Iran, South Africa, Brazil are doing, and the rest of the global South. They're not trying to fight the United States. They're not trying to pick a battle with the United States. But they're also not just going to take our bullshit. And they're not going to let us bully them. They're saying, no, enough.
Yeah, no, I mean, on the one hand, I I disagreed with, because I heard these assessments at the BRICS summit that, Lula might come in there and not be as amenable or embrace BRICS
Right.
so much in the summer. I wasn't so worried about Lula because I believe Lula is really a champion of the multipolar world. I was worried about the Brazilian government being so unstable, maybe disallowing that from happening. But again, as you said, we were pleasantly wrong there. And I want to show you now, Larry, because after the BRICS summit, amid all of these threats by Donald Trump, you had even the Telegraph saying that China is vowing deeper support for Russia after the Trump threat. But what's so interesting about this, Larry, is that there's actually not much in this report. The only thing that's in here is what China's foreign ministry would always say, which is that they oppose unilateral sanctions of any kind. Here it is. China responded to Mr. Trump's threat by saying it firmly opposed all unilateral illegal sanctions by the United States. But it's the Telegraph even having to respond to this, being what it is, a mouthpiece of the collective West foreign policy establishment, that I think is notable.
Yeah, well, but China also said that they couldn't afford to have Russia lose, because they recognized, he said, because then we'd be next. I think he also said that, didn't he?
I think so. It wasn't contained in this report, but continue, and I'll find it.
Yeah. So in saying that, China's actually upped the ante, and you're seeing, the relations between Russia and North Korea have not always been smooth either, but they have grown closer and put aside those differences over the course of the last three years. So you're beginning to build a block where, China is now sitting down with India, having very candid discussions about their border issues and recognizing that they need to resolve them, because candidly, I think that part of the efforts of intelligence organizations like the CIA or British MI6 has been to foment as much conflict between those countries as possible. Because we see, as long as we can keep India and China fighting and India and Pakistan fighting, then we can exploit that chaos to our own advantage and to their own disadvantage. And it's a very cynical policy, but God, we've been doing it for, as long as I've been alive. Just think back that the United States was backing, either directly or indirectly, both Iran and Iraq in the Iran-Iraq war. We were allowing Israel to supply Iran with U.S. weapons, while we were supplying Saddam Hussein in Iraq with chemical weapons, or the chemicals used to make chemical weapons. And our attitude was great. The more these ragheads kill each other, the better for us, and it'll also help weaken Russia. A cynical, evil policy. But that's what we did. And so it's important for these countries to wake up and recognize the United States does not have your best interest at heart. Sorry.
Yeah, and to the report of China telling the collective West that it will not allow Russia to lose or can't afford to. This was actually a report from a private meeting between Wang Yi and his counterpart, and his German counterpart in the European Union, where he told the EU's top diplomat that Beijing cannot accept Russia losing its war against Ukraine, as this could allow the United States to turn its full attention to China. This was an official brief on the talks. So it hasn't been confirmed by China per se, but given the situation, Larry, it's highly understandable that while China isn't directly aiding the so-called conflict in Ukraine, as it's been blamed for doing, it certainly looks at this with much interest.
Yeah. No, it's like I said, they've awakened to the fact the United States is the threat, and we got to protect ourselves. If we don't have cohesion, if we split apart, then they will destroy us piece by piece. And the one who's I think facing potential destruction is the United States. It is destroying its influence, and it is alienating formerly key allies or for people that provided support. And countries like Japan and South Korea are even starting to hedge their bets.
Very true. Yeah, and Russia. I don't know if you caught this, Larry. Russia, our good friend Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson was just here saying that we are already in World War III.
Right.
Well, there are prominent Russian journalists, thinkers, academics who are writing the same thing. This is from Dmitry Trenin, and while this was published in English in RT. It was actually translated from a Russian publication. And so what he says, Larry, and I'm just going to pull a quote from this. He says World War III has already begun, and he has direct recommendations of what Russia should do as the aggression escalates. He says fellow European powers like Britain, France, and Germany must be made to understand they are vulnerable. Their capitals are not immune. This message should reach Finland, Poland, and the Baltics. Provocations should be met swiftly and decisively. If escalation is inevitable, we must consider preemptive action. First, with conventional arms, and if necessary, we must be ready to use quote-unquote special means, including nuclear weapons, with full awareness of the consequences. Deterrence must be both passive and active. I mean, this is maybe not the official Russia position, Larry, but it is being published in Russia,
Sure.
And it is making its rounds across both English language Russian media as well as Russian media itself. So what's your assessment of this and your reaction to this? Because this is I feel like over the past several months into the end of the Biden administration, this kind of posture has been increasingly prevalent.
Well, if Russia had done to the United States what we've done to Russia over the course of the last 3 years, we might very well have had a nuclear war by now, because the United States would have attacked Russia. We would have responded militarily. Putin has exercised far more patience, and I think wisdom in his response. It's angered a number of people in Russia who want a much harder, tougher response. But I think it's also predicated on Putin's understanding that the kind of price that Russia has paid in previous wars, when you're losing 27 plus million people in World War II, is a number not matched by any other country in the world ever in history. So they're very cautious to avoid expanding it. But I do think, in line with Trenin, that Russia no longer has to worry about using nukes, because they've got the Oreshnik missile. And the Oreshnik can deliver the punch of a nuke without the radioactivity, and deliver it with precision. I think the first flashpoint we'll see as the war on the ground in Ukraine turns dramatically against the Ukrainians, and I think we'll see that very clearly by the end of August. The tensions will increase in the Baltic Sea. Russia already now is starting to escort its tanker fleet through the Baltic Sea, even though there are attempts to interfere by countries like Denmark, Norway, Finland, etc. And that could lead to an incident up there that could escalate. But we then have to step back and look at what is the capacity of England, France, and Germany to escalate. Do they have large reserves of troops? Well, no, they don't. In fact, Germany already has trouble arming putting actual rifles into the hands of its existing soldiers. Do they have deep stockpiles of critical weapon systems and ammunition? No, they don't. So I don't know if you've ever done any martial arts training or boxing, but if you've never done it, the first time you get out on the mat, and they said, we're going to let you spar for 2 minutes, you suddenly discover that 2 minutes seems like 20 minutes, because your body, when you're exerting and punching or wrestling, your body, it drains your strength of your body. Now imagine that you've got a round that's 3 minutes long, and now you got to go 15 rounds. You got to do that for 45 minutes. Unless you've trained and prepared yourself to do that, you'll die in the first round. Maybe make it to the second, but not likely. That's exactly the situation the West is in. They're fat old guys that have been sitting in their Barca lounge drinking beer or wine, watching television. They haven't been out running, they haven't been out walking. Now all of a sudden, they're supposed to, get into a full-fledged fight with Russia, who has they're tanned, rested, and ready. They fought, they've experienced it, they've demonstrated they know what they're doing. And so I pray to God it doesn't go to that. But the West is too stupid to necessarily understand that point.
Yeah, and I want to turn also to Trennan's recommendations, because I think there are things that are happening, and I think this is what's significant about this. You have, on the one hand, this is in response to World War III beginning and the escalations. This is an obvious response to the U.S. and, of course, the collective U.S. escalations of late in Ukraine. He says, first, strengthen the home front, promote unity, social justice, patriotism, nationalism, this sort of thing. Second, consolidate our external alliances, DPRK, Belarus, naming them directly, Israel-Iran war, providing lessons about how the enemy coordinates very closely. And then, of course, what I said before, Europe being made to know there are going to be consequences, preemptive actions. The last one is the information shield. Battlefield includes narratives, alliances, and public opinion. Larry, a lot of this stuff already appears to be happening. And this gets to the question of, what do you make of, there's this narrative, a very confident one coming out of the Russian side. There are some, though, who are concerned outside maybe of the Russian sphere, the geopolitical analysts, some I have on my show, who are concerned that, well, this multi-layered hybrid war, if World War III is beginning, it's a long one. And it's one that's not maybe necessarily meant to lead to a battlefield outcome for the United States in its favor, but maybe one that eventually leads to the collapse of Russia through the ongoing, prolonged need to engage in a war of attrition. What do you make of this argument? Because I've seen it, I've heard it, and it's one that some are concerned because of what happened to Syria, that such a thing might happen to Russia too. Yeah,
it just shows a complete fundamental lack of understanding of what Russia's capabilities are and reality is on the ground. When you go down that list of Trennan, you're right. The first two things, we need to forge our relationships with our neighbor. Well, hell, they've done that in spades. The relations with Belarus and with China are great. And, Russia's got a problem with Azerbaijan, but Russia's taken steps to correct that. Azerbaijan is only 10 million people. They're not that big. And Azerbaijan is extremely vulnerable, because their main source of material wealth right now is oil. Iran and Russia can both cut that oil off in a heartbeat, and then Azerbaijan is screwed, totally screwed. And Azerbaijan has set itself up to be taken on like this because of its role, I believe, in assisting the attack on Russia on June 1st in the spider web, and its role in the assassination or facilitating the assassination of Iranian President Raisi in a helicopter crash inside Iran after taking off from Azerbaijan, and his role in allowing Israel and the U.S. aircraft to use Azerbaijani airspace to attack Iran. So I think both Iran and Russia have now recognized there's a problem. They're going to take care of him. The real failing of Russia is on the information operations side of the house, getting their message out. They've been very clumsy and slow at that, in my view, and sometimes almost naive. And because there's such an aggressive anti-Russia narrative being pushed in the West, and in some cases, in particular in Europe, they go to it by banning any kind of platform that presents any kind of message that is described as pro-Russian. Of course, Russia does the same thing in Russia by limiting channels such as YouTube and certain platforms like Patreon. But I think openness is a much better approach, and there's ways to counter the anti-Russian narrative in the United States. It's just Russia's got to make that a priority. But what the military conditions on the ground will still dictate the ultimate narrative, because one of these days you're going to see an implosion of Ukraine, and then all of the lies that have been perpetuated by the West about, Ukraine's on the verge of victory, Russia's losing, Russia's economy is in the tank. It's going to be exposed as just pure crap, as lies.
Yeah, and I think the big difference between Russia and Syria is that Russia is not occupied by some of 30% by the United States. Also, the sanctions have, of course, gone much differently for Russia than they have for Syria for a lot of different reasons.
Well, what the main reason for that is that Russia is self-sufficient.
Yep.
Russia can produce everything it needs to feed, clothe its people, to make sure they have fuel to run into the cars, to build new consumer items. They have everything. Syria had none of that. Syria had oil. That was it.
Yeah. Yeah. And was sanctioned so hard that it couldn't rebuild. And Russia doesn't have that problem at all. Actually, Russia is building more. There are reports that the ruble is on the rise again after some slowdown due to, it seems like Russia imposed slowdown of its economy to keep things balanced. And the US dollar is actually going the opposite way in terms of exchange rates. So even on this front, this advantage just isn't there for the United States. And then this gets me to the question there. You said Ukraine will eventually implode. How does the United States, given that we've had promises for more weapons, we have threats toward BRICS, we have a multi-layered attempt at a hybrid war by Trump, how does the United States keep this conflict alive? I think one thing that can be underestimated, maybe not a strength for the U.S. actually in this respect in NATO, is that a dangling, dying, yet still standing Ukrainian army doesn't necessarily mean victory at the end of the day, or that some kind of hybrid war will eventually turn into a Syria-style collapse.
Well, Ukraine is totally dependent on Western aid. And at some point, that Western aid is going to become unavailable. And they will not continue to operate as a government. They won't be able to pay pensions. They won't be able to, keep the lights on. That's the moment of the implosion. And the one that will be able to come in and start restoring society is Russia. So, there's going to be a hard reckoning for Ukraine. They're already, the pain, the damage is already done in terms of the number of men that have been killed in Ukraine. Percentage wise is basically going to make it's wiping out a generation of men. That the women are it'll be an ideal situation for men from other countries that want to find a wife or a girlfriend, because there's going to be an oversupply of women. But the guys who died, this is sort of like what happened, I called it the Chaco War, the war between Bolivia and Paraguay that took place more than 100 years ago. But in that war, about 75% of the Paraguayan men were killed. and it created a real problem there for and generationally. So, that's sort of where Ukraine's headed.
And then finally, Larry, on a different note in the last few minutes here, your reaction to the reports that Iran's president was under and injured in an assassination attempt by Israel. Your overall assessment now of where West Asia is in the last few minutes here.
The United States has lit a fire in Asia, in West Asia, that we can't put out. That Iran, if you recall, about 3 weeks ago, we were hearing that, Iran came asking for the ceasefire. Not true. And our talks are going to begin next week. Hasn't happened. And that what has happened is Iran has booted the IAEA. I have not seen, so today is a crucial day, June 15. Today is the day that the snapback provisions in the JCPOA are supposed to kick in. If those sanctions kick in and the Europeans get on board with trying to enforce more sanctions against Iran, then it's highly likely Iran will completely withdraw from the non-proliferation treaty. So what the United States will have achieved is gone from a position where it had access to Iran's nuclear program through the IAEA, both through overt and covert sources, and will now be blinded. And Iran may even withdraw from the non-proliferation treaty. And so now the U.S. is going to have to assume that, they are getting a nuke. But what can we do about it? Because if we go in and say, what if we got to go stop them now? We got to say, whoa, wait a second there, Donnie Trump. You just told me you obliterated their program. It's not going to start for years. Now, I was saying that was bullshit at the beginning. And we're going to find out that that Trump was wrong. Once again, there's a surprise. Trump didn't know what he was talking about. Oh, shocker.
Well, I mean, that's what's so interesting about the Trump administration in so many ways, Larry. It's almost like it's like the U.S. empire wearing its aggression on its sleeve rhetorically, but in doing so, it overplays a hand. It bluffs into an essentially there's no way out of that. You bluff your way into a position that you can't get out of. For example, with Iran, you have this idea that you've already obliterated something and you've gotten the job done, and now the Lindsey Grahams of the world and most people around Donald Trump's administration, they want to use that pretext forever and ever and ever. They want a nuclear Iran pretext so they can continue on to the next phase, because we know that's what Netanyahu came to Washington to discuss. So what do you make of this? Because it's the same with Russia. It's the same with China. Trade war. It's the same with Russia now. Now they're talking about tariffs on Russia. There's nothing to tariff. Russia doesn't do trade with the United States. So your reaction to this, Larry, and an analysis of what is causing this overplaying of the hand, because it's so repetitive at this point. Can it be explained away as just Donald Trump being Donald Trump, or is it more than that?
No, it's not just Trump. I mean, this has been the American approach, that we've been able to throw our weight around and get people to do what we demand. Now we're finding out that doesn't necessarily work. So, there are only two sort of exports still that come from Russia into the United States. One is fertilizer and one is uranium. Well, you want to make them pay higher tariffs on fertilizer? Fine. Russia, they'll still sell it. All that means is the people in this end, the farmers who need the fertilizer to grow crops, are all of a sudden going to have to pay a higher price, and in that process, maybe not be able to continue to grow as much food or farm. And as far as, the uranium, Russia doesn't care. if the United States doesn't want to buy it, they've got other markets for it. So be our guest. So again, it'll be the domestic producers in the United States. They're going to pay the price. It's just a stupid policy, counterproductive.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Larry, it's been great to be with you today on this stream. Everybody, hit the like button as we head out of here. We have Larry Johnson's YouTube channel, Countercurrents, in the video description where you can follow his videos. They are very much worth watching. Also in the video description are the places where you can support this work, Patreon, Substack, and so much more. Larry, do you have any final words before we head out?
And just come read me at sonar21.com.
Yes, I'll put that in the video description once the show is over. Thanks to Eddie Tours for the super sticker. Thanks to Empire We Are for the commentary here. With all that said, everybody, have a good rest of your day. I'll be back this weekend. I'll let you know who's coming on at that time. Without further ado, take care. Hit the like button as you go. That keeps the stream going as the algorithm does its work. Take care. Bye-bye.